Speaker.
Megan Woods with a better sense of
Thank you very much,
timing.
Mr. Speaker. And, it's my pleasure to take a call on this bill and for Labor supporting it. And I wish the member for Rangitikei good wishes going back to his office, where apparently the Melbourne Cup is being run. All in the use of a comma, I think, could have made quite a difference. So enjoy the race, and I hope your horse comes in. But Mr. Speaker, it is a pleasure to speak on this bill and to outline Labor's support for it, because I think there are some very serious elements to what is a reasonably comprehensive piece of legislation, an omnibus bill that seeks to address a number of measures that has its genesis a long way back. In fact, its genesis in the previous Labor government. And if we have a look to this government's work on this, in August 2011, Cabinet agreeing to an all-of-government response to organised crime in New Zealand. And what we can actually see if we have a look around the legislation that's been put in place around organised crime and anti-corruption in New Zealand, that in the relatively recent past we've seen a flurry of this legislation. So that we've seen the Criminal Proceeds Recovery Act in 2009, the Anti-Money Laundering and Countering Financing of Terrorism Act of 2009 and the Search and Surveillance Act of 2012. And this is a piece of legislation that fits very much in with these bills in making its contribution to controlling this. So what this legislation seeks to do is to establish an effective toolbox for targeting organised crime in New Zealand and enabling the law enforcement that our agencies need to be agile and able to quickly and effectively respond to new challenges as they emerge. And Mr. Speaker, I think one of the things that we can see is that new challenges are something that constantly present themselves. I think previous speakers in this debate have spoken about New Zealand's great reputation. The fact that we consistently rank really highly in Transparency International's findings, that we're first equal out of 102 countries, and we do, as a country, take a great source of pride, and so we should, about an open society, but we do have to realise, and this legislation does acknowledge, we're not immune to domestic and transnationally generated organised crime. So the police's 2010 assessment of organised crime in New Zealand documents a wider range of organised criminal markets and activities, ranging from drug use crime to fraud to intellectual property theft to cybercrime to environmental crime. And these activities significantly impact our communities, our international reputations and our international reputation in international markets. So if we take, for an example, New Zealand's methamphetamine market is estimated to be worth $1.2 billion per year and contains organised criminal group involvement from production right through to consumption. So these are real issues in our communities that we do need to address. And Mr. Speaker, while I've outlined some of the legislative measures that we have in this country to combat organised crime, there is a growing, a well accepted acceptance, if I can say such a phrase, Mr. Speaker, that we have many non-legislative mechanisms there to target organised crime as well. But what this bill really did, and the regulatory impact statement of this bill really did identify 7 key areas where this does need to be addressed. And in her address opening the debate for Labor, the Honourable Annette King talked about New Zealand's first case where we had human trafficking on trial in this country. And if we look at the regulatory impact statement that was produced in only 2013 for this bill, we can see that that was saying, well, it's not considered to be a considerable risk in New Zealand. In recent years, New Zealand has come under criticism for perceived gaps in the trafficking in persons offence from the United Nations Human Rights Committee and from the United States in their Trafficking in Persons report. So we can see how swiftly we do have to move. But as previous speakers have noted, Mr. Speaker, we do need to be vigilant. Our excellent international reputation hasn't occurred by accident. It has occurred because we have put a great deal of merit and we have taken a great deal of pride in the mechanisms and the transparency that we have at all levels in our country. And that, Mr. Speaker, needs to start with our government. That is where we have to have the utmost levels of transparency. And it is fair to say in recent months and weeks that questions have arisen around this government's level of transparency that is being operated in. And many of my colleagues have gone through some of those. But if we look at some of the mechanisms where we need to have transparency, one of the key mechanisms that we have is the Official Information Act, Mr. Speaker. And that is there to allow individuals and private citizens to find out what's going on with their government, to be able to find out what it is that the people that wield power are doing. And if we look at the abuse of the OIA system that has been happening under this government, it is something that is cause for alarm, Mr. Speaker. We have the Prime Minister's office telling blogger Cameron Slater to OIA classified SIS documents, then had their SIS declassify them and quickly release them to this blogger, Mr. Speaker. This is not something that we can tolerate from our government. We have the Prime Minister's office and other ministerial offices tipping off bloggers when an OIA is about to be released to an opposition party or a media outlet, telling them to put in the request for the Official Information Act request, which is then provided, and that we have this as a means of quelling down criticism of a government. And that, Mr. Speaker, is one of my major concerns here, that we need to, if we're going to have a country where we value transparency, where we value anti-corruption, and we value the fact that we can have people that can speak out and be a critic of a government, we cannot have an organised ring which the government is implicated in stopping that informed debate and stopping that debate by the denigration of people's reputations and by seeking to destroy people, not argue on the merits and the facts. We see this, Mr. Speaker, when we have 33 of the top health academics and professionals in this country writing an open letter to the Prime Minister to tell them they are uncomfortable about the perceived conflict of interest around Catherine Rich's appointment to the Health Protection Agency, because that very person had been part of an organised attack on nutritional scientists at the University of Otago who had put out information that was counter to what her body wanted to see. Now, Mr. Speaker, I enjoy debate. I have no problem with any organisation entering into a very robust debate around what is happening, arguing about the facts. But is that what happened, Mr. Speaker? No, that is not what happened. We had the person putting out the information, the person whose research this was, being attacked. We had her reputation called into question, not her science, not her finding, not even the quality of the writing in her paper, Mr. Speaker, which sometimes academics could be held to account for. No, Mr. Speaker, it was her as a person. And this is what we simply cannot tolerate in this country, and we certainly cannot tolerate it when we have our government and our Prime Minister's office implicated in this. So, Mr. Speaker, we are very happy to support this legislation to select committee. We think there's some really serious issues in here that this bill and this legislation will cover off. I agree with the previous speaker that said at select committee there do need to be some serious questions and some probing done from all sides of the House around where it is the civil liberties fit and what protections can be put in place to protect those. But, Mr. Speaker, as a House, we cannot simply pass legislation around protecting ourselves against corruption and putting in place mechanisms for transparency and think that we are immune from those as well. Because, Mr. Speaker, transparency and having an open government that lives up to the reputation that we as New Zealanders hold dear starts with us in this House. It starts with everybody on both sides of this House, and it is not something that we can afford to let go. Because, Mr. Speaker, we've had it said about the people in the city I live called scum by this organised racket. We've had the family of people killed on the West Coast called feral. We've had academics attacked. We've had teachers attacked. We've had people that dare to criticise attacked. And, Mr. Speaker, the question for me is who is next? And that is not something that we can tolerate. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.